Hi, everyone. My name is Jerry Huntman. I'm the Managing Director of IFWG Publishing, and it's my pleasure to be the host of this event. We were going to have Tim, but as the MC. However, at the moment, he appears to be there's something beyond his control happening. He may or may not be able to attend, but if he doesn't, I'll play with two hats. I'm happy to do that. Um, got a little story to tell you. IFWG Publishing is a small traditional publisher, and for a number of years now, we haven't taken on any unsolicited submissions. The reason why is because just workload, and also we get a lot of good material through our normal agents and our network. However, there's a little tricky thing here, and that is that we've got a little rule, informal rule. Whenever we go to physical events, conventions, and such like. The directors, myself in particular, are very happy for informal pitches by authors. And no small number of our publications actually have originated from that. New Zealand is a very rich source for us, and the reason why it's a rich source is because they've just got great authors. And I just love going to their conventions. Unfortunately, COVID has dropped a few for me recently, but in those particular events, I have had pitches. I've just done a mental calculation. I think 12 of our titles from New Zealand authors are actually as a result of a pitch or an indirect pitch. And of that 12, five of them was the Reforging series by Barbara Howe. That's the origin of how we got to look at the manuscripts for Barbara. Um, the first manuscript that we read was enchanting. There are two major uh, benefits or value that we found coming from that. The first is the obvious one. She's a great writer. She's just technically a really good writer, and she pitched the writing perfectly for a young adult fantasy and as well for adults to read. The second one is probably more important in a funny sort of way, if you had to make a distinction, and that is that we were so impressed with the strength of the female protagonists and the fact that there were so many and that they were so important and real. As far as we were concerned, there are very few fantasy novels out there that really portray women realistically and genuinely, and that's really what attracted us to Barbara's work. So that's the origin. That's where it all started from. Now, before we get on with the proceedings, I just want to mention one thing. Anyone who's attending this live event, not the recorded event, but the live event, is in the running for the five book series being sent to them, to two winners. That's the door prizes. This is in recognition of the fact that this is not just a book launch. This is the final of a series, and it represents a really important milestone. For Barbara, it's many years of work have now reached a conclusion. And even for IFWG, we're talking quite a few years of project work. Many editors involved, proofreaders. I was very heavily involved. And I should make a special mention. Catherine Archer Wills, the illustrator and cover designer, she did all five. She made them pitch perfect to the mood and the style of the books. And can I add to that the book cover for the final book, The Forge, is truly outstanding and caps it really well off. Now, because Tim isn't here, and I hope he's okay, what we'll do is we'll get um, Barbara in, and then we'll begin some. I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll go into some questions from those out there who are observing the event, because you can, in fact, make comments and therefore questions in the live broadcast. I should add one more thing before I forgot to mention this, and that is for those of you who want to be in the running for the award, for the door prizes, it's a really good idea to either like this event, this broadcast, or to even just say hi. By doing that, we'll more easily find your name. So after the event, we can publish the names of the winners and actually get in touch with them. But anyway, without further ado, I will introduce Barbara.
Hi, Jerry. Thank you
Hello.
thank you for that wonderful introduction. I do hope
Quite quietly. But look, anyway, these things do happen. This is what happens in live broadcasting. Anyone who's old enough will know that from television, I think. But anyway, I think the first thing that I really wanted to talk about, and it just sort of makes sense, is to tell us a little bit about you and also about how this all started for you.
well, my family and I moved to New Zealand in 2009. And while I was still job hunting, I had more time on my hands than I'd had in years. And um, and my daughter was doing my daughter in high school was writing fan fiction, and I got inspired by what she was writing, and also by the fact that uh, we'd run into a series of books where it's supposedly intelligent women just did some really stupid things. And I just got really tired of reading that kind of thing, and I thought I could do better. I thought I could write something that both both of us, my daughter and I, and even my husband, would enjoy, with female characters that didn't make me blush or cringe or roll my eyes. And so I started writing what turned out to be The Locksmith, and the rest of the family loved it and asked for more, and I just kept going.
And we're talking about a fair amount of time between now and then, aren't we?
It's been 12 years.
I wasn't going to ask the number of years, but you said it, so good. Okay. Well, look, I think also another thing that we need to do to talk about really early is, especially for the benefit of an audience that perhaps have not read the books or are very, very new to what's happening. Um, can you give us a little sort of brief synopsis of the series so far?
Sure. The series is set in an alternate Europe where Charlemagne, that great earth wizard and king of the Franks, turned north to conquer the British Isles instead of going east and south into Saxony and Italy. So, with Europe in chaos and his conquered territory full of warring tribes, he directed his highest ranking witches and wizards to use their magic to somehow protect the kingdom's borders and calm the internal strife. And their response was to create four powerful magical entities named the offices, where each one works in a symbiotic relationship with the head of the corresponding elemental magic guild. The most powerful of these offices is the Fire Office, which provides the New Kingdom's defenses against both internal and external threats. And the least powerful is the Water Office, which dispenses justice. So these four offices served Franklin well in its early years, but 1,000 years later, the kingdom of Franklin is strangling in their iron grip because they can't adapt to changing needs. The offices are basically inflexible, rule-based AIs, and their creators never considered that they might need repairs or that rules would become obsolete. In fact, they built in safeguards against tampering, which made trying to make any repairs dangerous as well as difficult. So the first four books cover the assembly of a team of witches and wizards dedicated to reforging, that is, repairing or rebuilding whatever is needed to make the offices functional again for the modern era. And the challenges that they face include a civil war fought over the nature of the changes to the reforging the water office brings. So, so that brings us up to the forge.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, we don't want to do any spoilers, do we? So the forge then is about tackling the big one, the fire office, and a different sort of war.
Yes, the fire office is Franklin's shield. It's a force that's kept the kingdom's boundaries intact and its inhabitants safe for a millennium. But Franklin doesn't have an army. It has the fire office, and it has hotheads in the fire guild who take direction about as well as a flock of fireflies. But they have to learn to protect themselves. The European Empire, their old enemy, is waiting to invade as soon as the fire office is out of commission for repairs. So the book has two major threads. One follows Renee, otherwise known as Warlock Snorri, the only member of the Fire Guild Council who's not involved in the actual spell casting. And he has to build an army to hold off the invasion. And it pains him to admit that the fire office that the Fire Guild can't do it alone. And he has to learn to think outside the bounds of his preconceptions. And the first of those is he has to admit that other less demonstrative Franks can love Franklin as much as the Fire Guild does. And he has to come to realize that he can't dismiss air and water wizard recruits to his army as airheads and cold fish. If he does that, he'll never build cohesive fighting units. And he has to learn to control his temper. In other words, he has to grow up, and some of the lessons along the way are hard ones. The other thread follows the Reforging coven, the team actually tearing down and rebuilding the fire office. With the country at war around them, they can't afford to make mistakes. There's not going to be any time to back up and start over if things go wrong. So they have technical problems to solve. They need to shorten the time interval needed to rebuild the office. And so they have to pare back the fire office to the minimum defensive functions necessary and jettison everything that can be added later, like riot control. And they also have to deal with personality clashes and generational conflicts in order to become an effective team capable of handling a complex project under extreme stress.
Okay. Okay. Well, look, I think that you probably want to present some examples. So how about you do some readings for us, just so that we get a bit of a feel for the narrative, if you don't mind.
Yes, I have a couple of selections.
Thank you.
The first excerpt, the Coven have been arguing over changes to the structure of the fire office. Irene said, "If it worked, it would slice the support needed from the Air Guild during the actual reforging down to 3 spells. But if it went wrong," Quicksilver said, "yes, the corpus of Air Guild spells could collapse." "That body of Air Guild spells, you say, not the entire fire office?" She hesitated. He said, "You think it possible the entire collection could collapse, forcing us to start over, losing hours of work?" "It's unlikely, Your Wisdom, but I can't rule it out." Quicksilver leaned back, his arms crossed, his eyes hooded. Young lady, you have no idea the extent to which you are frightening me. With one hand, you are offering hope for a solution to a thorny problem troubling my sleep for years, while with the other raising yet another weapon to add to those already arrayed against us. The risk of disaster, Sven said, the risk of disaster remains whether we try a different way or not. With this, Snorri could use those spells for the defense until it's time to move them. Snorri's eyes lit. We'd be nuts not to try it, Arturus said. What do you say, old man? Quicksilver brooded and didn't answer. Arturus clapped him on the shoulder. Get used to it, because we're going to run with it. Irene, let's see those rewritten spells. The second selection I've picked out involves Renee. Warlocks don't walk. Warlocks jump through the fire, or if they've exhausted their magic in the fire warlock service, they'll commandeer a carriage or wagon to take them to the nearest Earth Guild tunnel. Warlocks never just walk. Except for warlocks in disguise with their talents hidden under a lock because they don't want the news spread of who they are and where they are going. Renee had already walked the 4 miles between the tunnel mouth and Sorceress Lorraine's cottage twice that day, and he would have to do it twice more. His muscles ached, he had blisters on both heels and the ball of his left foot, and the skin on his thighs was being rubbed raw where his cheap laborer's trousers didn't fit well. If the lowering clouds turned to rain, that would be the last straw. For God's sake, big sister, don't cry to me, little brother. Do your penance like a man. Renee pulled his collar tighter, thrust his hands in his pockets, and walked. Over the next hour and a half, he went through annoyance, resentment, and rage. It did rain on him, until agony focused on his feet crowded out everything else. The rain stopped and the clouds lifted, but the pink and blue vista brought him no joy. He needed to step up the pace or he'd be walking in the dark. Sorceress Lorraine perched on a rock among the tide pools, admiring the sunset. She rose and came to meet him as he limped towards her. He went down on his knees at her feet. I'm sorry, he mumbled, cleared his throat, and said it again louder. I'm sorry. Lucinda and Quicksilver were right. I was wrong, and I acted like a jerk. I don't blame you for being pissed off at me. He stopped and rubbed his nose. The folds of her gown rippled in the breeze, but she was a statue. I know I've ruined my chances of you ever doing me any favors, but you know them, and you know we're not all obnoxious hotheads. He risked a glance. Her face was unreadable. He dropped his gaze to her feet. I hope you're not so pissed off at me you won't tell the Water Guild Council what you told Lucinda. She said, Why does that matter to you? He twisted, turning his head a full circle, scanning the shoreline. There were no other people in sight. He eyed the birds and chewed on his lip. They'd been used as spies before. Did he dare? You fear eavesdroppers? Come. She walked away. He sighed and struggled to his feet. He would be walking back in the dark.
I like that ending. I just sort of noticed in those two examples that it sort of refers to, or at least implies, a lot of teamwork's needed. Is that something you intended?
Yes. Well, yes and no. As I was writing it, my first priority was simply to tell a coherent and interesting story. And I knew teamwork was important, but it was a somewhat secondary concern. It wasn't until I could step back and look at the complete work that I realized that teamwork had become the central theme. The story doesn't have a single hero. It has several major players. Each of those players acknowledge that they can't handle everything alone. They have to work with people who make them uncomfortable, and they accept that even if they don't like it. The first 3 books each had a single hero with a narrow point of view. The 4th book, The Wordsmith, expanded on that with 3 point of view characters. The Forge has perspectives from a number of characters. The major players include our old friends Lucinda and Renee, but they also have to share the stage with the king and a young air witch. And there are several other minor point of view characters. But all of these characters, whether they have a large role, like Renee's in overseeing Franklin's defenses, or a small role of an earth wizard protecting a fire wizard from a flood, they're all active participants, contributors to the team of Franklin's defenders. Now, team dynamics can get pretty complicated. As a professional software developer for decades, I've been on plenty of teams. Some of them worked really well and some of them didn't. And the ones that didn't weren't pleasant experiences, but they didn't have life or death consequences. But there are life and death consequences for being team players here. And in fact, it reminds me of what Benjamin Franklin said during the American Revolution: "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." The characters who strive to work together are rewarded for it. The ones who insist on having their own way come to grief.
Yeah, yeah. The When I read the books, and particularly the Forge, um, I got this feeling that it was really hard for societies and people to change. That was a theme that I sort of picked out. Um, Even when the change is compelling. Was that something that was in your mind when you started writing the Forge, or did it just happen?
Well, that's been an explicit theme throughout the series. The catchphrase, "nothing ever changes in Franklin," has been in all 5 books, but change is coming, whether they like it or not. And obviously, there are going to be people who don't like it. Change is hard. Um, on a personal level, so much of what we do is habit, automatic responses, unquestioned assumptions. And even when we make a decision that we need to change, putting that into effect can be like slogging through quicksand. And it's even worse when our rational and emotional selves are at war with each other. Snorri starts off with a mistaken idea of what he has to be, what he has to become to be a great warrior. And he makes himself miserable and generates unnecessary conflict with the people around him, trying to mold himself into something that his emotional compass rejects. It isn't until he reimagines what a great warrior can be and aligns that conception with his emotional compass that he begins to make progress. Now, Snorri knows that he needs to change and wants to do it, and it's still hard for him. How much harder is it at the societal level when we can't even agree on what changes are good? Change is frightening, especially if you have an unimaginative worldview, which can only see things in terms of win-lose scenarios. If you can't envision change bringing win-win scenarios, then of course it's going to be frightening. And it's frightening in Franklin, which has been stuck in stasis for centuries. So there are always holdouts like Enchanter Paul and Warlock Sunbeam who fight against any change. But it's important to realize that change happens even in Franklin. There are internal changes, internal pressures, and external pressures. Internally, there's population growth going on. And the Royal Society of Swordsmiths, with their limited number of members, as the number of blacksmiths grow around them, it becomes not humanly possible for them to do the work that they were chartered to do, which is overseeing the training and ethical business practices of the ordinary blacksmiths. And then there are external pressures as well. There was the discovery of the New World, and if Franklin is shut out of the transatlantic trade by obsolete treaties, that's a serious threat to their economy. So change needs to be recognized and steered in healthy directions rather than fighting losing rearguard actions. But of course, then that brings up the question of what is healthy.
Yeah.
And one of the principles I try to live by is recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So changes that expand our sphere of empathy, whether it's admitting that air wizards are not necessarily airheads or that Black lives do matter, these are changes that are worth working towards, even if there's a rough ride along the way.
Okay. On that matter, and maybe there's a little bit of a giveaway for some and not for others, but was one important character, Gillian, was her treatment by a teacher based on your personal experience?
Directly, no. I spent most of many boring hours in class daydreaming, spinning out stories in my head. I never got caught reading, and even if I had, well, Jillian's confrontational and I'm not. Indirectly, however, when my stepson was in junior school, he was getting C's in math, full marks on his tests, and nothing at all on his homework, which he never bothered to hand in. And so the parent teacher conference, the conversation went pretty much like it did between Sven and the supervisor and the teacher. He's not trying, parents. Look at the pattern of his grades. He's not trying because he's bored. Teacher, how can he be bored when he's not doing the work assigned? Yeah, I'm not trying to rag on teachers in general. It's like any other profession. Some people are better at it than others. Some teachers are more insightful than others.
Yeah, that is true. I can spend a lot of time talking about that too, but I won't. Look, how much of the forge did you have in mind when you wrote the locksmith? So, how much of the end did you have in mind when you began?
Well, by the time I finished The Locksmith, I had a very clear idea of the overall story arc involving Lucinda, and only a little less so what happened to Renee. I knew what the final confrontation would be between Franklin's warlocks and the Empires. What I didn't know, even while I was writing The Wordsmith, was the details of the Reforging coven and the restructuring that would have to happen. I knew that Irene and her daughters would play a part in it, but I didn't know who would have the major role until I actually started fleshing out the Forge. I've heard other writers talk about how some characters become such vivid personalities that they take over the story and drive it in directions that the author didn't originally intend. And Gillian did that here. Uh, she got the bit in her teeth and ran with it. And I'm really very happy with the way that turned out.
Okay, okay. Look, I had one or two other questions that I did want to ask, but I'm aware of time, and I certainly would like the opportunity for those who are in the audience, so to speak, to also be aware of, to give them an opportunity to ask questions too. So what I'll do is I think at this point, I'll let you have a reading, a final reading. And then while you're reading, if anyone's got any questions, please post them in the posting area, the comments area of this broadcast. I'll pick it up and then pass it and then ask the question to Barbara. So I'll leave it to you, Barbara. And if anyone's got any questions, think about them, even just write them, just post them, so to speak. So over to you, Barbara.
Okay. In this selection, Alexander, the king of Frankland, is having breakfast. Gunther is a prince of the European Empire, their old enemy. A brisk fire drove the April chill from Alexander's small morning room. The yolks in the eggs were running just the way he liked them. He mopped up the last of the eggs with toast, savoring both his breakfast and the peace of the breakfast hour, his time alone before the daily influx of courtiers, diplomats, and citizens all clamoring for his attention. He rested his left hand on the table, the unadorned walnut as smooth as satin under his fingers. Several small Frankish landscape paintings in unadorned frames hung on the room's paneling. A chessboard in the corner held an unfinished game, awaiting an hour or two of Warlock Snorri's time. There was no gold leaf anywhere in the room. He had no need for show here, in this private room, populated only with objects that brought him pleasure and comfort. Besides, guilt could not compete with the splendor on display outside the windows, where a line of flowering cherry trees glowed in the slanting morning light. He watched, mesmerized, as a light breeze fanned the blossoms, then realizing he still held his fork, speared a bite of sausage. He stopped with the fork halfway to his mouth. The fireback was gone. Beyond the fire, another young man watched him. The room beyond the fire was larger and more sumptuously appointed than Alexander's morning room. With his chin resting on his hand, his elbow on the chair arm, and one leg crossed over the other knee, the room's occupant looked quite at ease. Alexander lowered his fork, rose, and bowed. "Good morning, sir. Prince Gunther, we presume. Or do you prefer Warlock Sturmmeister? To what do we owe the honor of this visit?" The other man tilted his head without rising. "Good morning. And yes, I am Warlock Sturmmeister. I wished to see for myself this mundane boy styling himself King of Frankland. I am surprised you haven't screamed for your guards." The 18-year-old king had stiffened. After a few seconds, he lowered himself into his chair. "We became inured to warlocks appearing in the fire during the Yule War. We have no need for guards. We are confident the fire warlock is watching and will intervene should the need arise." "Should the need arise? Ha! I could step through the fire and drag you back to Danzig with me before your fire warlock could react, and he could do nothing in retaliation. He cannot step outside Franklin's borders." The emerald hanging on the gold chain inside Alexander's shirt did not vibrate or prickle his skin. His lips thinned. Gunther said, "You do not know this. Such a small thing, but so significant. Would Franklin pay a heavy ransom for your return, or would your fire guild abandon their mundane king and install another puppet? I am almost inclined to do it for the entertainment value." "How diplomatic of you," Alexander murmured. "Diplomacy, pah!" Gunther waved a lazy hand. "Diplomacy is for cowards and underlings and rulers of countries without the strength to enforce their demands. Diplomacy is for kings like you who are happy to be dictated to by greater men. Or women. Your locksmith is a greater man than you." Alexander's eyebrows rose. He spread marmalade on the last piece of toast before saying, "Although they sometimes appear in the same person, the qualities that make a good warrior are not the same qualities that make a good ruler. Franklin's warlocks understand that." Gunther laughed. "Do they? You cannot believe Warlock Snorri will let you cling to your throne once your fire office is rebuilt. I will be kinder than he. Once we have conquered Franklin, I will keep you alive for my amusement. You will have daily lessons in how a truly great emperor rules." Alexander had been eating his toast while Gunther talked. He swallowed, licked his lips, and sipped his tea. "If you are trying to intimidate us or make us angry, you are not succeeding." Gunther shifted his weight forward, nearly coming out of his armchair, but fell back into a rigid facsimile of his initial relaxed position. "You are too stupid to know when you've been insulted, or you'd be raging." Alexander dusted crumbs from his hands. "You, sir, have been extraordinarily well blessed. You are among the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the Western world, and yet the things driving you are pride, greed, arrogance, and envy. We can feel only one emotion towards a man in your position who cannot enjoy what he has been given. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Gunther. That emotion is pity. Gunther lunged towards the fire, snarling, "I'll teach you to—" A bang and bright flash sent Alexander rocking backwards. When his vision cleared, the fire back had returned. Gunther was gone.
A nice little bit of action at the end there. Look, I just got a message from Tim, and Tim passes on his sincere apologies that he couldn't make it. It was something beyond his control. So it's just one of those things, as I said, when you've got live broadcasts, things happen. I do have some questions coming in, which is great. I've got a question from Roma. What prompted you to work the book all the way through to a final version and then publication, as opposed to something that was more limited to family and friends?
Um, well, I guess the family and friends just kept insisting that it was worth publishing. That they thought that I had something that was good enough that other people would like it, and apparently other people agreed with them.
I'm not complaining because I got to publish you, so fair enough. I'm being a little bit quick here because we've got to be careful with time, and I want to make sure I get every question that absolutely does come through. Um, Lisa Beck, hi Barbara. Will your next story be a series as well, or a one-off book? What's your feeling about writing series versus single books? Two questions there.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If I had known quite what I was getting into when I started the Reforging series, um, it turned out to be a lot longer process than I ever expected. Writing 5 books uh, at the rate of about one every 2 years turned out to be quite a long process. Um, I I'm working on. I'm about 2/3 of the way through the first draft of a of a new story set in a different fantasy universe with different magic rules, and it started off as a that it was going to be a one-off, but as I get further into it, I keep imagining what will happen to these same characters after the end of the book. So right now, I don't know whether it's going to be a one-off or a series. It's I've never been one to write short stories. The stories that I imagine always end up just being long, long soap operas, multi generational epics. That's just the terms that I tend to think in.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Stephen, he wrote, "Hi Barbara. Did you have a view of the entire series story arc when you started the first book, or did it evolve with each subsequent book?" I think it's a subtly different question to what you mentioned before. We're talking about the story arc in this particular case, I think.
Yeah, I did have a view of the story arc, but it did evolve. I can't say I'm really either. There are some writers who plot out everything, and then there are some writers who just start writing without an idea of where it's going. I'm somewhere in between. I have each of the books that I've written so far. I've had an idea of where they had to end up, but finding the story in the middle, finding the path from the beginning to the end always ended up going in many different directions than what I had first thought they would go. So
Okay.
it's I do some planning and I do some plotting and I'll write, and then realize I have to go back and, and do some more planning.
Yeah, in the classic, pantsers versus plotters, sounds to me like you oscillate between the two.
Yes, I'm a plantster.
Yeah, a planter. Okay. John wrote, there appears to be a bit of a fair bit of alt history in your novels. What's your take on this?
Um, I wouldn't really call them alternate history. And the world seriously diverged from our world long about the 8th century with Charlemagne, and 1,000 years later, things are so different. I didn't try to I didn't try to make the world close to 18th century Europe. Uh, I wasn't really interested in doing the research necessary. I just wanted to tell an interesting story, and um, so I really can't claim that it's alt history.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Oh, look, that's fair enough. It's a whole technical. It's actually a whole discipline in itself, actually. Um, Lisa has come back with another question. How did you learn the craft of writing? And she actually says something very nice. Your prose is beautiful.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Um, Mostly, I've just read a lot. Uh, how can you? I don't know how one could be a good writer without having read lots of other people's work to recognize what is good. So,
I'd like to ask an additional question then. Did you do much? Did you do? I mean, did you do? And this might be too revealing. I don't know. Did you do any writing prior to the series?
uh, fiction back in high school that I never showed anybody. Um, since then, I did lots of writing, but it was all nonfiction, technical technical papers and
Oh,
the like. Um,
um,
so so yeah, I didn't actually start writing fiction seriously until 2009.
oh, look, I'm impressed because I think for many people, and I'm a writer as well. For me as well, the process of becoming a good writer is, as you said, reading a lot, but it's also writing a lot. And I never thought of moving the nonfiction. I mean, associating the nonfiction, and apparently your husband has stated that you've written several tons of books in the nonfiction space. Uh,
Uh, I think he meant read several tons of
Oh, I
books.
read several times. Oh well, but anyway, the connection is one that I never thought of. But look, we'll go to the next question. But in all seriousness, your writing, and I'm not saying this for marketing purposes. It's me personally. Your writing is really excellent, and don't know where you got it from, because it was fantastic. Um,
Oh, thank you.
but anyway, I'll just have a quick look at see if there's any other questions. There's a couple more, and I think I'll do one more question actually, and then I'll have to wind this up because of time. Um, what was Sarah? I'll just paraphrase because she wrote a lot. Um, I was fascinated by the way women are portrayed, as Jerry had explained. It's very refreshing from my point of view. What was the origin of your decision to go this way?
Um,
Having strong and realistic women. You did touch on it a little. Was there anything you can expand on that?
uh, I just most of my friends, most of the women I know are strong individuals, and I try to write uh, about people that I would enjoy being with. Uh, I get really tired of reading stories about where the women involved are either uh, sidekicks, minor characters, footmats, whatever. Um, I believe in uh, women who have strong friendships, and women who have um, competent women who are competent and intelligent, and I write about the women that I would like to read about, would like to be friends with.
I absolutely think that's a very, very, very pertinent statement. I'd probably like to add, and I'm sure that you've probably inferred that anyway in some of the earlier discussion, is that yes, you're right. I mean, like often women play very minor roles and what have you, but where women often in certain fantasy novels are prominent, they're prominent because they're not because they're real, but because there's something bizarre about them. You know, in other words, oh, you know, she's a great warrior because she's, you know, you have to make an excuse for her being a great warrior, or you have to make an excuse for her to be something, as opposed to just being realistic, just being part of the montage, the landscape. I don't know. I mean, was there an element of that too, perhaps? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Look, sorry. I just threw my two bobs worth in, but from a publisher's point of view, in particular, right? And as I said right at the beginning, that was one of the reasons why we chose to publish your manuscripts for exactly that reason. Look, I'm very conscious of time. I've said that several times. The I think I'll just wind this up now. Thank you so much to everyone who's attended from all around the world. Also, thank you so much for those who've asked questions. This actually added a lot of depth, I think, to what we've already discussed earlier. Um, just a reminder that if any of you are listening now and have not said hi or asked a question or ticked like on the broadcast, if you want to be in the running for getting all five books sent to you, you might want to do that now. Um, I also would like to encourage you to, if you haven't read the series, to go out and look for it. It's available everywhere, and start from the beginning, because it's each book's great, but the sum total is so much better. I really would encourage you, because what we've just discussed is the sort of thing that you'll read. Something a little bit more realistic, something a little bit more, I don't know, just meaningful. I think that's perhaps the best way of putting it. And of course, it's a good story in itself, entertaining. Um, as I said before, Tim couldn't make it, which is a bit of a shame. So therefore, on behalf of Tim, I'd like to officially launch The Forge. It is now officially launched. But I want to also echo my earlier point, and that is that it isn't just the launch of The Forge, it's the completion of a very big project called Reforging series, all five books. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll just leave a link up here for a couple of minutes where you can go if you want to, just to find out a little bit more about The Forge. That will also get you very easily to find a lot more about the series and where you want to go from there, if you do want to go from there. So thank you so much. And thank you very much, Barbara, for being available. And
Thank
I'll
you, Jerry.
and I'll see you next time, no doubt. So goodbye. But like I said, I'll leave this live stream on just for a minute or two so people can jot down a link if they're interested. So goodbye.